The sound scissors make cutting through 18th-century silk brocade is not a snip. It is a sigh, a soft, final exhalation of threads that have held their tension for 300 years. I was listening for that sigh, my head bent under the focused white light of the conservation lamp, when Liam called my name from the doorway of the lab. His voice was too bright for the sterile quiet of the room, a splash of cheap watercolor on a vellum manuscript. I didn't look up. My job was to save things, and I was beginning to understand that some things could not be saved. The sigh of the silk was a cleaner, more honest sound than anything he had to say. His shoes, expensive Italian leather I'd polished for him just last night, clicked on the polished concrete floor. A nervous, staccato rhythm. He stopped beside my work table, casting a shadow over the bolt of celestial blue fabric, its silver threads tarnished to a lovely, soft pewter. The fabric had been part of a French court gown, and its owner had likely watched a revolution brewing from her palace window, utterly oblivious. I felt a certain kinship with her. "Alara," he said again. "We need to talk." I finished the cut, my hand steady. The shears, German steel and perfectly weighted, felt like an extension of my own fingers. I placed them on the felt tray with a quiet click. Only then did I turn to him. He was wearing the suit Julien Devereux had bought for him. It was a beautiful suit, tailored to perfection, but it wore him, not the other way around. It was a costume, and he was still learning his lines. His face was pale, his eyes shifting around the lab, as if the rows of acid-free storage boxes and climate-controlled cabinets were judging him. They were. "Julian's party is tonight," he said, avoiding my gaze. "The gala at the museum." "I know," I said. "I have to be there. The Westmoreland tapestry is being unveiled." My hands had spent 6 months coaxing life back into that tapestry, stitching its faded grandeur back together with single-filament silk threads dyed to a perfect match. It was my work, my world. He finally met my eyes. "About that, Julian, he thinks it would be better if you didn't come as my guest." The air in the room grew thin and cold, like at high altitude. I felt a familiar pressure behind my sternum, a deep, internal bracing for an impact I had been sensing for weeks. It was in the way Julien Devereux's eyes would slide over me at dinners, a dismissive appraisal that took in my simple, practical clothes and my hands, which were clean but never perfectly manicured. It was in the way he'd complimented my work as a charming little hobby. It was in the way Liam had stopped correcting him. "He thinks it would be better," I repeated. My voice was flat. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. It stained things. "He's introducing me to the board of the new acquisition," Liam stammered, the words rushing out. "It's a delicate moment. Appearances are critical. Serafina will be there." Serafina, Julien Devereux's daughter. A woman who was less a person and more a curated collection of expensive assets. Her name tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew it. I saw the flicker of self-loathing in his eyes before it was snuffed out by the more powerful, more seductive glow of ambition. "I see," I said. I turned back to the bolt of silk. I ran a fingertip along the clean, perfect edge I had just cut. "Earned. Precise. Mine. So you are going with her?" It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "It's just for one night, Alara. It's strategy. It's about our future." Our future. He was still using that word. It felt like a relic from another age, a shard of pottery from a civilization that had already collapsed. He was talking about a future of glass-walled boardrooms and charity balls, of summers in the Hamptons and winters in Gstaad. A future financed by Julien Devereux. My future, the one I had been meticulously building, was here. In the quiet hum of the climate control, in the scent of old paper and linen, in the patient, demanding work of saving beautiful things from the ravages of time. He used to understand that. He used to say my hands held history. Now, he just wanted them to hold a champagne flute and not embarrass him. "You should wear the blue dress," he offered, a pathetic attempt at a peace offering. The one my mother liked. His mother's approval. Another currency I had apparently failed to accumulate. I picked up a fine-tipped tweezer and began carefully removing a single, errant modern fiber from the antique silk. It was a piece of polyester, bright and garish against the subtle, organic sheen. An intruder. It had to be removed. "No," I said, my eyes fixed on my work. "I don't think I will." He stood there for a full minute, the silence stretching between us, thin and fragile. He was waiting for me to cry, to rage, to fight for him. He was waiting for a scene. It would have absolved him, allowed him to play the role of the regretful man making a hard choice. I gave him nothing. My stillness was a wall he couldn't climb. Finally, he turned, his expensive shoes clicking a retreat. The lab door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss, and I was alone again. I carefully lifted the polyester fiber away from the silk and let it fall to the floor. An insignificant piece of trash. Then I continued my work. The tapestry was waiting. It had survived wars, fires, and the slow, grinding indifference of centuries. It would survive this. So would I. The Westmoreland tapestry hung like a captured ghost in the museum's main hall. It was magnificent. The restoration was seamless. The new threads were indistinguishable from the old, a quiet testament to months of painstaking labor. I stood at the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of mineral water, and watched people look at it. They saw a beautiful object. I saw the 4,712 hours of my life, the ghost pains in my neck and shoulders, the triumph of coaxing a 16th-century dye recipe back to life in my small lab. My name was on the small brass plaque beneath it, Conservation by Alara Vance. It was all the recognition I needed. Then I saw them. Liam, with Serafina Devereaux clinging to his arm. She was poured into a dress of liquid gold, a stark, glittering contrast to the muted, complex tones of the tapestry. She looked like a new coin, shiny and uninteresting. Liam saw me across the room. For a moment, his polished facade cracked. He looked hunted. Then Julian Devereaux was beside them, clapping a proprietary hand on Liam's shoulder, and the mask was back in place. I had planned to stay in the shadows, to observe my work and leave. But Julian had other ideas. He steered his small, gilded party directly towards me, a shark scenting blood. "Ah, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a rich, condescending purr. "The little miracle worker." He gestured vaguely at the tapestry. "Quite the accomplishment. Mending things. A very utilitarian skill." Serafina laughed, a tinkling, empty sound. "It's so quaint," she said, her eyes flicking over my simple black dress, a well-made but unassuming garment I'd owned for years. Like knitting, but for very, very old things. Liam said nothing. He just stood there, his jaw tight, a handsome statue in a borrowed suit. His silence was the cruelest sound in the room. "It is a profession, not a hobby," I said, my voice even. I looked directly at Julian. "It requires a degree in chemistry, a deep knowledge of history, and a steady hand. Much like corporate acquisitions, I imagine. Though our mistakes are perhaps less catastrophic to the lives of others." A flicker of annoyance crossed Julian's face. He was not used to being challenged, however subtly. He recovered quickly, his smile becoming a razor. "Of course. How clever. Liam, your former fiancé is quite clever." He emphasized the word former, twisting the knife. He then turned his attention to the glass case next to us, which held a selection of smaller artifacts. He pointed a thick finger at a small, embroidered glove. "Now this," he said, tapping the glass. "This is a Devereaux piece. My great-great-grandmother's. On loan, of course." Dr. Finch, the museum's director and my mentor, materialized at my elbow. He was a small, bird-like man with eyes that missed nothing. "A beautiful example of point-de-gaze lace, Julian," he said smoothly. "And we are very grateful for the loan. Alara, in fact, performed a minor stabilization on the cuff last month." Julian's eyes narrowed. He looked from the glove to me, a slow, reptilian blink. "You touched my family's property. I saved it," I corrected him quietly. The silk thread was becoming brittle from light exposure. It would have shattered within the year. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Saved it? For what? So it can sit in a dark box? Things are meant to be used, Ms. Vance. To be worn. To signify stature." He looked at Liam, then back at me. "Something you wouldn't understand. Some things are simply beyond your grasp." He was no longer talking about the glove. The insult was so precise, so perfectly aimed, that it left me breathless. He was telling me that Liam, like the glove, was a Devereaux property now, an artifact to be displayed, a symbol of his power. And I, the mender, the quiet woman with the steady hands, had no right to even touch it. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, metallic taste in my mouth. I looked at Liam, searching for any sign of the man I had loved, the man who had admired my quiet strength. There was nothing. He was looking at Julian Devereaux with the desperate, hopeful expression of a stray dog who thinks it has finally found a master. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just over. It was a war he had already lost. And Julian Devereux had just declared one on me. I didn't sleep that night. I went back to the lab. The silence, usually a comfort, felt different. It felt heavy, like the moments before a storm. I sat at my work table, the celestial blue silk shimmering under the lamp, and I thought about Julian Devereux's words. Beyond your grasp. He had judged my entire worth based on my clothes, my profession, my refusal to play the fawning sycophant. He saw a quiet, low-born woman with a utilitarian skill and dismissed me. He could not imagine a world where his assumptions were wrong. His arrogance was a fortress, but he'd forgotten that even the strongest fortress has foundations. And I knew all about foundations. How to test them, how to find their weaknesses, how to bring them down with a single, perfectly placed pressure point. For 3 years, I had lived a small, quiet life. I had wanted it. I had built it, piece by piece, like a restoration. I had fallen in love with a man I thought shared my values. I had believed that my work, my skill, myself, would be enough. It was a naive belief, the kind held by people who have never had to fight for their survival. My family had fought for theirs for 1,000 years. We did not do it with armies and banners anymore. We did it with quiet influence, with impenetrable discretion, with assets so deeply embedded in the global economy that they were invisible, like the supporting threads in a tapestry. We did not flaunt our power. We were power. And Julian Devereux, in his petty cruelty, had reminded me of who I was. I packed a small bag in the pre-dawn light of my apartment. The life I had shared with Liam was everywhere. The coffee mug he used every morning. The book on his nightstand. The faint scent of his cologne on the pillow beside me. I felt a pang of grief, sharp and sudden. It was for the man he was, or the man I had believed him to be. That man was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. The grief passed, replaced by something colder, clearer. It was not anger. It was resolve. A quiet, absolute certainty. I left the engagement ring on the kitchen table. It was a beautiful, simple diamond. He'd saved for 2 years to buy it. It had meant everything to me. Now, it was just an object. A thing. I placed it beside the key he had not yet returned. Then I walked out and did not look back. My first stop was Dr. Finch's office. He was already there, a pot of tea steaming on his desk. He looked at me over the rim of his spectacles, his expression gentle. "I am taking a leave of absence," I said, my voice devoid of tremor. He nodded slowly. "I see. The Devereux incident. It was a catalyst," I said. "Not the cause. I have always known there was more to you than Ms. Vance, the gifted conservator," he said softly. "I never pried. Your work spoke for itself, and that is all that ever mattered to me." His respect was a balm on the raw wound of Julian's contempt. He was a man of true substance, his worth measured in knowledge and integrity, not stock portfolios. "Thank you, Alistair. That means more than you know." I paused. "My work here is not finished. I will ensure a seamless transition for my replacement. Everything is documented." "I have no doubt," he said. He stood and walked me to the door. "Alara," he said, his hand on my arm. "Be careful. Men like Devereux don't just build empires. They crush anything that stands in their way." "I am not in his way," I said, meeting his worried gaze. "I am the ground beneath his feet, and it is about to give way." From the museum, I took a taxi to a nondescript office building in the financial district. There were no names on the directory in the lobby, only floor numbers. I took the elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened into a silent, minimalist space with a single person, a severe-looking woman, sitting at a brushed steel desk. She stood as I approached. "Your Highness," she said, with a slight, respectful bow of her head. "Is the line secure in S?" I asked. "Always," she replied, gesturing to a heavy, soundproof door. Inside was a single chair and a communications console. I sat down and pressed a sequence of keys. After a moment, a voice came through the speaker, crisp and familiar, the voice of the man who had managed my family's affairs since I was a child. "Annalisa," said the chamberlain, "we have been waiting for your call." "It is time, Cajun," I said. My voice, my real voice, felt strange in my mouth after years of disuse. The title felt even stranger. Princess Annalisa, a name I had shed like a heavy cloak. "Activate the Amaranth Protocol." There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of hesitation, but of wait. The Amaranth Protocol was a scorched earth strategy, a financial weapon of last resort designed to protect the interests of the House of Saruth. It had not been used in over a century. Understood, Cajun said, his voice calm and absolute. What is the target? Devereaux Corporation, I said. And all its holdings. All its suppliers. All its distributors. I want Julian Devereaux isolated. A king with no kingdom. I want him to hold nothing but dust. And the catalyst for this action? Cajun asked. It was a formality. The protocol required a direct threat to the house. I thought of Julian's words. Beyond your grasp. I thought of Liam's silence. It was not just a personal insult. It was an attack on my identity, on the core principle of my family, that our worth was inherent, not performed. Julian Devereaux had made the fatal mistake of assuming that what he could not see did not exist. He threatened a princess of the blood, I said, the words tasting of iron and ice. He just didn't know it. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet efficiency. From my temporary suite at a private hotel, I directed the storm. Cajun and his team worked with surgical precision. Amaranthan Holdings, the anonymous sovereign wealth fund that was, in reality, the primary financial instrument of my family, began its work. It was a ghost in the machine of the global market. It did not buy companies outright. That was crude. Instead, it acquired debt. It purchased controlling interests in logistics firms, raw material suppliers, and obscure but critical tech patents that Devereaux Corp relied on. It was a silent, patient siege, cutting off supply lines Julian didn't even know could be threatened. I spent my days on encrypted calls and my evenings in the hotel library, reading. I found a strange comfort in the familiar scent of old books. I did not watch the news. I did not follow the society pages, which were filled with breathless coverage of Liam and Seraphina's whirlwind engagement. Their wedding was to be the event of the season, a grand affair designed to cement the Devereaux-led merger that would make Julian the undisputed king of his industry. He was celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship, and he was the only one who couldn't hear the groan of the bulkheads. Liam tried to call me. Once. The number flashed on my burner phone, and I stared at it for a long moment before declining the call. There was nothing to say. He had made his choice. He had traded love for a title, authenticity for a brand. He had chosen the gilded cage, and I was about to remove the cage, the gilding, and the birdseat. The day of the merger announcement, I chose my outfit with the same care I would use to select a conservation tool. A suit of dark charcoal wool, cut with severe, elegant lines. A simple silk blouse in the color of old ivory. No jewelry, save for a small, discreet signet ring on my smallest finger, bearing a crest no one in this country would recognize. It was the sigil of my house. The amaranth, a flower that never fades. I watched the press conference on a monitor in the command center Cajun had established. Julian Devereaux was at the podium, beaming, his face flushed with triumph. He was magnificent in his arrogance. Liam and Seraphina sat in the front row, looking every inch the corporate royalty. Seraphina looked bored. Liam looked like he had finally arrived. Today, Julian boomed, his voice echoing in the grand ballroom, is not just a new chapter for Devereaux Corporation. It is a new era for global commerce. On the screen behind him, the stock tickers of the two merging companies were displayed, both deep in the green. Cajun gave me a subtle nod. Now, he said quietly into his microphone. On the big screen, the Devereaux stock ticker flickered. It turned from green to red. Then it began to fall. It was not a gentle slide. It was a cliff dive. A murmur went through the room of journalists. Julian faltered, glancing at the screen, a flicker of confusion on his face. Then the ticker for the other company, the one he was acquiring, did the same. Simultaneously, a dozen news alerts hit the phones of every journalist in the room. Mr. Devereaux, a reporter shouted from the floor. Is it true that Global Transport Solutions has just canceled all contracts with your company, effective immediately, and that your primary microchip supplier in Taiwan has been acquired by an unknown entity and is halting all shipments? Another called out. Julian's face went from ruddy to pale. His aide rushed onto the stage, whispering frantically in his ear. The color drained from his face completely, leaving a sickly, grayish pallor. He looked out at the sea of faces, his mouth opening, and closing like a fish pulled from water. He looked old. He looked small. Liam was on his feet, his face a mask of disbelief. Serafina was already on her phone, her expression cold and calculating. She was cutting her losses. That was my cue. Cajun and two of our security detail, all dressed in the same dark, anonymous suits, entered the ballroom from a side entrance. We moved with purpose, parting the stunned crowd. The cameras, sensing a new, more dramatic story, swiveled to follow us. We did not stop until we reached the foot of the stage. Julian Devereaux stared down at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified recognition, though he still didn't understand. He saw the woman he had dismissed, the little miracle worker, standing at the epicenter of his world's collapse. "You," he whispered, the microphone carrying the sound throughout the silent room. "What is this? What have you done?" I did not answer him. I looked past him, to Liam. His face was ashen. He looked from me to the collapsing stock tickers, to the imperious men standing beside me, and the pieces began to click into place in his mind. The look on his face was not anger, or even betrayal. It was a profound, soul-crushing bewilderment. He had made a calculated business decision, and he had misjudged the value of the asset he had liquidated. Cajun stepped forward and addressed the room, his voice calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cajun Matten, Chamberlain to the House of Saruth. I represent Amaranthan Holdings. As of 10 minutes ago, Amaranthan Holdings has acquired a controlling interest in the Devereaux Global Network, including all its primary suppliers, distributors, and creditors. All assets are hereby frozen pending a full audit and restructuring." A collective gasp went through the room. The name, House of Saruth, meant nothing to them, but the language of power was universal. "This is impossible," Julian sputtered. "You can't. Who are you people?" Cajun turned slightly and gestured to me. "Amaranthan Holdings acts on the sole authority of its principal owner." I walked up the few steps onto the stage. I took the microphone from the stand next to a paralyzed Julian Devereaux. I looked out at the flashing cameras, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I was not nervous. I was home. This was a different kind of conservation work. Not saving a tapestry, but dismantling a rot. "Mr. Devereaux," I said, my voice clear and amplified, carrying to every corner of the room. "You asked who I am." I turned to look at him, at this man who had built an empire